I will never raise the pay of the people who pay my salary, who generate the value that I steal to pay for all of my nonsense. I'm never gonna raise their salary.
Are you on? Which side are you on?
Something that's been grinding my gears. I really hate how the fetishization of millionaires who act as if they are being persecuted over their speech or doing things like this. And we had another installment of that last week. Dana White, the CEO or, somehow, in management of UFC, was on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he said that he threatened to resign from the UFC to prevent Joe Rogan from getting fired during some controversy in 2022. I don't even know what the controversy was with Joe Rogan in 2022, and I don't care what it was. As far as I can tell, he's probably a talented, UFC person, fighter and a commentator, and, whatever, more power to him. And in general, that's not objectionable to me. Like, I have no objection to Dana White, standing up for Joe Rogan and saying that, hey, he should remain a UFC commentator. I have zero objection to that. And maybe that was the right thing to do. Doesn't really bother me, one way or another. But the elevation of Dana White because of that to some position as a defender of free speech rights and working people because, Joe Rogan was a worker for the UFC, and so he's defending his workers' right to freedom of speech and defending his workers, generally. It's just so frustrating to me. And we had Candace Owens doing that last week, saying, imagine being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company and offering your resignation rather than allowing someone who works for you to get canceled. Dana White is a real-life hero. The future belongs to fighters. It's just so effing disgusting. It's so gross because, of course, it's all fine and dandy to show class solidarity. There's a bit of a, in a certain sense, in that one area of the UFC, there's a class difference between Dana White and Joe Rogan in that, Dana White is an owner and Joe Rogan is the worker, but Joe Rogan is obviously part of the club of the owning class. And so
dude's rich.
Dude's rich.
He's quite rich. He says a lot of stupid stuff.
Hundreds of millions of dollars from Spotify. And so, look, it's one thing to show that kind of class solidarity with somebody for saying some inopportune thing or another. And like I said, it's all fine and dandy, and I don't have any problem with it. But the idea that then you're going to be elevated as a hero and saying that you're a champion of fighters when you can actually take a look at how he treats the rest of his workers. Listen to this. UFC fighters make 20% of the revenue that they generate. 20% compared to every other sport where the athletes get something between 48 and 52% of the revenue that they generate. Other sports like the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, right? These are basically every other sport has revenue split with the athletes of like 50%. Athletes get 50% of the revenue that they generate, and 50% of the other stuff goes to other stuff. And that's not illegitimate, right? There are other legitimate costs besides employee salaries. There's advertising. There's, equipment. There's stadium rentals. There's, all this stuff. It's not illegitimate that you have other costs besides the worker's salary. And 50-50 seems like a reasonable split. Because all of that other stuff is dependent on the athletes doing it, and that's what their unions have been able to negotiate. And yet in the UFC, the people who actually generate this stuff, they're only given 20%. And it's even more difficult for people in the UFC. I was reading more about this last week in preparation for the segment, and one of the issues in the UFC is that they are not able to actually cash in on their athletics as often as other athletes are.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
right? So if you're a football player, you play some, 18, 20 games a year or something like that. And so you've got a whole year, you got all of these different things that, all of these different opportunities to cash in and make money based on your athletics. But UFC fighters, they have to train for months and months and months and months and sometimes even a year for one fight, right? That one fight. And then you can't fight again for another long amount of time. And so the opportunities that they have to generate revenue is less. And then on top of that, they're getting a smaller split of the revenue than other athletes are. And that has been brought up to Dana White multiple times. The fact that UFC fighters are underpaid. And he always and inevitably scoffs at it. In one instance, this was back in 2022, 2 years ago, saying that raising UFC fighters' pay is, quote, never gonna happen while I'm here. Dana White is a hero, so says Candace Owens. I will never raise the pay of the people who pay my salary, who generate the value that I steal to take home and pay for all of my nonsense. I'm never gonna raise their salary. But this is the hero. Also, speaking in generally a lot of anti-union rhetoric, talking about as the UFC was interested in one point and probably still is in going to New York City, but they're in, they work with some non-union game operators, and so the unions in New York are like, no. You can't come here with non-union labor, and so he's always been upset about that, and been had a burr in his side about the unions there. It's also worth noting that MMA is not regulated at the federal level the same way boxing is, or the same way that a lot of other, the MLB has specific antitrust carve-outs, right? I mean, the federal government has explicitly acknowledged that the Major League Baseball is a trust, is a monopoly, and there's a carve-out for it, right? MMA is not regulated in that way. And yet they're able to do all of this stuff. All of this abuse of their workers, the people who generate the revenue. And then, while they're doing that, and also this is exactly the same kind of model that WWE has of non-union athletes. The reason that all of this is happening is because the UFC fighters do not have a union, and so they're not able to kind of come together on a collective basis to do this sort of stuff. Same thing at the WWE, and there's always been attacks from management on the concept of unions in both of those companies. And but then you can do all of this. You can keep fighter pay low. You can fight efforts to raise fighter pay, and then at the same time you can be called a real life hero by the new the new spokespeople for the right wing populist pro worker movement. So there you go. That's what's been grinding my gears this week. Seeing nonsense like that.
Yeah, it's funny how free speech only seems to work when it comes to like bigots, but not when it comes to union talk, or any sort of exercise of your rights as a worker. It's interesting how that always plays out.
Yep.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.